Shalom. Welcome to the Jewish View. My name is Rabbi Nachman Simon with the Delmar Chabad Center, and today our topic is the history of the Jews, and also from a uniquely non-Jewish perspective, because that would be an objective view, and there's nothing to say that we're good culture and we're great. We're going to talk about how the outsiders look at us in a very unique position. Now remember this, and I'd like to bring out this number, that the Jewish population of the world, of course you can easily do the arithmetic yourself, you're talking about between 14 to 16 million Jews into over 4 billion human beings on the planet Earth. You're talking easily arithmetic to 1/3, if even less, but let's say 1/3 of 1%. I get 1/3 of 1% of the world population is Jewish. Now, it's a tremendously small number, and we know, of course, that Jewish people have affected the world history surely more than outdistances their specific numbers. And this is a little bit about, this is called The History of the Jews. It's just a few pages which I'm excerpting out of a very long book, because the history of the Jews is over 3,000 years. You can imagine it would be a long book, but just a few pages from this. The author is Paul Johnston, not Jewish again, looking at the unique position that the Jewish people had on world history. And I quote, "Why have I written a history of the Jews? There are 4 reasons. The first is sheer curiosity. When I was working on my history of Christianity, I became aware for the first time in my life of the magnitude of the debt Christianity owes to Judaism. I thereupon determined, should an opportunity occur to write about the people who have given birth to my faith, to explore their history back to its origins and forward to the present day, and to make up my own mind about the role and significance. From the time of Abraham up to the present covers the best part of 4 millennia. That is more than 3/4 of the entire history of civilized humanity. I am a historian who believes in long continuities and delights in tracing them. The Jews create a separate and specific identity earlier than almost any other people, which still survives. They have maintained it amid appalling adversities right up to the present. Whence came this extraordinary endurance? What was the particular strength of the all-consuming idea which made the Jews different and kept them homogeneous? Did its continuing power lie in its essential immutability, or its capacity to adapt, or both? These are sinewy themes with which to grapple. Finally, the book gave me the chance to reconsider objectively, in the light of a study covering nearly 4,000 years, the most intractable of all human questions. What are we on earth for? Is history merely a series of events whose sum is meaningless? Is there no fundamental moral difference between the history of the human race and the history, say, of ants? Or is there a providential plan of which we are, however humbly, the agents? No people has ever insisted more firmly than the Jews that history has a purpose and a humanity, a destiny. At a very early stage in their collective existence, they believed that they had detected a divine scheme for the human race, of which their own society was to be a pilot. They worked out their role in immense detail. They clung to it with heroic persistence in the face of savage suffering. Many of them believe it still. Others transmuted it into Promethean endeavors to raise our condition by purely human means. The Jewish vision became the prototype for many similar grand designs for humanity, both divine and man-made. The Jew, therefore, stand right at the center of the perennial attempt to give human life the dignity of a purpose. Does their own history suggest that such attempts are worth making, or does it reveal their essential futility? The account that follows, the result of my own inquiry, will, I hope, help its readers to answer these questions for themselves. In the Antiquity of the Jews, Josephus describes Abraham as a man of great sagacity, who had higher notions of virtue than others of his time. He therefore determined to change completely the views which all of them had about God. One way of summing up 4,000 years of Jewish history is to ask ourselves what would have happened to the human race if Abraham had not been a man of great sagacity, or if he had stayed in Ur and kept his higher notions to himself, and no specific Jewish people had come into being. Certainly the world without the Jews would have been a radically different place. Humanity might eventually have stumbled upon all the Jewish insights, but we cannot be sure. All the great conceptual discoveries of the intellect seem obvious and inescapable once they have been revealed, but it requires a special genius to formulate them for the first time. The Jews had this gift. To them we owe the idea of equality before the law, both divine and human, of the sanctity of life and the dignity of the human person, of the individual conscience and so of personal redemption, of the collective conscience and so of social responsibility, of peace as an abstract ideal, and love as the foundation of justice, and many other items which constitute the basic moral furniture of the human mind. Without the Jews, it might have been a much emptier place. Above all, the Jews taught us how to rationalize the unknown. The result was monotheism and the three great religions which profess it. It is almost beyond our capacity to imagine how the world would have fared if they had never emerged. In antiquity, they were the great innovators in religion and morals. In the Dark Ages and early medieval Europe, they were still an advanced people transmitting scarce knowledge and technology. Gradually, they were pushed from the van and fell behind until, by the end of the 18th century, they were seen as a bedraggled and obscurescent rearguard in the march of civilized humanity. But then came an astonishing second birth of creativity. Breaking out of their ghettos, they once more transformed human thinking, this time in the secular sphere. Much of the mental furniture of the modern world, too, is of Jewish fabrication. The Jews were not just innovators. They were also exemplars and epitomizers of the human condition. They seemed to present all the inescapable dilemma of man in a heightened and clarified form. They were the quintessential strangers and sojourners. But are we not all not all such on this planet, of which we each possess a mere leasehold of 70 years? The Jews were the emblem of homeless and vulnerable humanity. But is not the whole world no more than a temporary transit camp? The Jews were fierce idealists, striving for perfection, and at the same time fragile men and women yearning for flesh pots and safety. They wanted to obey God's impossible law, and they wanted to stay alive too. Therein lay the dilemma of the Jewish commonwealth in antiquity, trying to combine the moral excellence of a theocracy with the practical demands of a state capable of defending itself. The dilemma has been recreated in our own time in the shape of Israel. Founded to realize the humanitarian ideal, discovering and practicing that must be ruthlessly simple to survive in a hostile world. But is not this a recurrent problem which affects all human societies? We all want to build Jerusalem. We all drift back towards the cities of the plain. It seems to be the role of the Jews to focus and dramatize these common experiences of mankind, and to turn their particular fate into a universal moral. But if the Jews have this role, who wrote it for them? Whose historians should beware of seeking providential patterns in events. They are all too easily found, for we are all credulous creatures, born to believe and equipped with powerful imaginations, which readily readily produce and rearrange data to suit any transcendental scheme. Yet, excessive skepticism can produce a serious distortion as credulity. The historian should take into account all forms of evidence, including those which are to appear to be metaphysical. If the earliest Jews were able to survive with thus the history of their progeny, they would find nothing surprising in it. They always knew that Jewish society was appointed to be a pilot project for the entire human race. That Jewish dilemmas, dramas, and catastrophes should be exemplary, larger than life, would seem only natural to them. That Jews should over the millennia attract such unparalleled, indeed inexplicable, hatred would be regrettable only to be expected. Above all, that the Jews should still survive when all those other ancient peoples were transmuted or vanished into the antiquity of history was wholly predictable. How could it be otherwise? Providence decreed it, and the Jews obeyed. Well, this is the epilogue from The History of the Jews by Paul Johnson. I don't want to put my seal of approval that I said all this. I read it, and I just wanted to bring it out to throw out ideas as we do here on the Jewish View. Different views of Judaism from different perspectives, even different professions, and even different peoples, even Gentiles, to see what they have to say about Judaism and to chew over different angles and different viewpoints about Jewish people and Judaism. And here is something from, again, this is a famous book, History of the Jews. I personally, I don't want to go to it with a fine-tooth comb. Most of it, he was right, and I just think that there is a plan in the world. I don't know if he brings home enough. He just says there is enough divine providence to say that the Jewish people exist, but there is a method to the madness, it seems, and if people would just connect events throughout history, sometimes they would see an emerging pattern. Like I guess he says, you can look at it different ways and see different patterns if you want to. But Judaism is well defined through the Torah, and if people look through the Jewish eyes and the Torah patterns, one can see the reasons for, like he says, the persecutions, and number two, just why the Jewish people are, and like teaching, as we said, that 1/3 of 1% of the world's population should have such a marked importance on the world. And now we're talking about, like he says, only religion and morals and monotheism. We're talking about even the secular world, how much overproduced the Jewish people have done into this world. And really for one purpose, and we can tie it all together, is just to bring and to teach the world as teachers. As a teacher over their students, just to tell them and to teach people to be better people. Mainly in monotheism, but if it needs scientific and technological studies, that's important also. Now here is from New College, recently in the news, the dynamics of Jewish history. The history of Jews and Judaism is a unique phenomenon. It is the most long-lived historical continuum in the emergence, development, and spread of Western civilization. Since appearance as a differentiated entity in the ancient Near East, about 4,000 years ago, Jews and Judaism have been active participants in every phase of the development of civilizations of Egypt, Babylonia, Assyria, and Persia. They are tightly interconnected with the rise and fall of the Hellenistic monarchies and the waxing and waning of the Roman hegemony. They gave birth to Christianity and successfully warded off the rivalry of their offspring. They sustained a creative and differentiated identity under the Sassanians despite the challenge of Zoroastrianism. They played a vital role in the launching of Islam, even as they spawned a variety of novel forms to cope with the creative expansiveness of this world-girdling religion. And most remarkably, the history not only did it remain confined to near Palestine or the Near East, but spread throughout the Western world, forming viable and significant communities in Africa, Asia Minor, the Balkans, Greece, Italy, Spain, France, Germany, England, and the Slavic lands, even reaching as far east as India and China. This diaspora history is all the more remarkable because it represents the bulk of the history of the Jews and Judaism during the past 2,000 years, and because it demanded adaptive powers that bordered on the phenomenal. In any given century, Jews would be living simultaneously as in many as 3 or 4 radically different societies, each of which demanded a distinctive form of Jewish adoption. If survival was to be sustained, not only was this challenge met, but it was met without annulling the distinctive Jewish identity. But this variety by no means fully exposed the uniqueness of Jewish history. Not only did it successfully traverse the ancient and medieval worlds, but it preserved itself as a viable strand with the modern world. A strand so viable as one, excite the wish to annihilate it, as Hitler did indeed attempt to. 2. Give birth to the modern nation state of Israel. 3. Sustain flourishing communities of multiple Jewish identity throughout the Western world. And 4. To be deemed worthy of sharing with Christianity the responsibility for the highest values of Western civilization. This is the empirical record. The facts as stated are not open to refutation. The uniqueness is there for all to verify. It is not a projection of some religious or ethnic wish. Again, The Dynamics of Jewish History by Ellis Rifkin. Now, I wanted to bring out to you, and it's so important here, is just that, and we try to bring this here, rational and logical ideas. I mean, people can think otherwise, and we always enjoy concerning other opinions. But when it gets down to when you see how the nations of the world do observe Jewish people and Judaism, I think it's clear that the Jewish people have a very unique position in the world. And the question then is, and I'm going to let people think this over, is for you to think over of what position and uniqueness that you find that the Jewish people have to offer to humanity. And with that, we're going to read some leading scholars, politicians, poets from different times in history that we all know, and see what their opinion of the Jewish people are. And this is a thesis from Concerning the Jews by Mark Twain. Yes, Mark Twain, author of so many novels, wrote an article concerning the Jews, and this is an excerpt what Mark Twain thinks about the Jewish people. If the statistics are right, the Jews constitute but 1% of the human race. Just my footnote, I guess it's gone less in the last 100 years, but all right, it's 1%. It suggests a nebulous, dim puff of stardust lost in the blaze of the Milky Way. Properly, the Jew ought hardly to be heard of. But he is heard of, has always been heard of. He is as prominent on the planet as any other people, and his commercial importance is extravagantly out of proportion to the smallness of his bulk. His contribution to the world's list of great names in literature, science, art, music, finance, medicine, and abstruse learning are also a way out of proportion to the weakness of his numbers. He has made a marvelous fight in this world in all the ages, and has done it with his hands tied behind him. He could be vain of himself and be excused for it. The Egyptian, the Babylonian, the Persian rose, filled the planet with sound and splendor, then faded to dream stuff and passed away. The Greek and the Roman followed and made a vast noise, and they are gone. Other peoples have sprung up and held their torch high for a time, but it burned out, and they sit in twilight now, or have vanished. The Jew saw them all, beat them all, and is now what he always was, exhibiting no decadence, no infirmities of age, no weakening of his parts, no slowing of his energies, no dulling of his alert and aggressive mind. All things are mortal, but the Jew. All other forces pass, but he remains. What is the secret of his immortality? Again, this is an excerpt from the complete essays of Mark Twain, and this excerpt from the Concerning the Jews, Mark Twain. Now, another article seeing how nations of the world in different times have observed the Jews. This thesis is from a letter called On the Jews by John Adams, second President of the United States. In spite of Bolingbroke and Voltaire, I will insist that the Hebrews have done more to civilize men than any other nation. If I were an atheist and believed in blind eternal fate, I should still believe that fate had adorned the Jews to be the most essential instrument for civilizing the nations. If I were an atheist of the other sect, who believe or pretend to believe that all is ordered by chance, I should believe that chance has ordered the Jews to preserve and propagate to all mankind the doctrine of a supreme, intelligent, wise, almighty sovereign of the universe, which I believe to be the great essential principle of all morality, and consequently of all civilization. I have read this last fall half a dozen volumes of this last wonderful genius's ribaldries against the Bible. How is it possible that this old fellow should represent the Hebrews in such contemptible light? They are the most glorious nation that ever inhabited the earth. The Romans and their empire was but a bauble in comparison to the Jews. They have given religion to 3/4 of the globe and influenced the affairs of mankind more and more happily than any other nation, ancient or modern. Again, Thesis on the Jews by John Adams, 2nd President of the United States. Thirdly, this is What is a Jew by Leo Nikolaevich Tolstoy. What is a Jew? This question is not as all so odd as it seems. Let us see what kind of peculiar creature the Jew is, which all the rulers and all the nations have together and separately abused and molested, oppressed and persecuted, trampled and butchered, burned and hanged, and in spite of all this, is yet alive. What is a Jew who has never allowed himself to be led astray by all the earthly possessions which his oppressors and persecutors constantly offered him in order that he should change his faith and forsake his own Jewish religion? The Jew is that sacred being who has brought down from heaven the everlasting fire and has illumined with his entire world. He is the religious source, spring, and fountain of which all the rest of the peoples have drawn their beliefs and their religions. The Jew is the pioneer of civilization. Ignorance was condemned in olden Palestine even more than it is today in civilized Europe. Moreover, in those wild and barbarous days which neither life nor the death of anyone counted for anything at all, Rabbi Akiva did not refrain from expressing himself openly against capital punishment, a practice which is recognized today as a highly civilized way of punishment. The Jew is the emblem of civil and religious toleration. Love the stranger as a sojourner, Moshe commanded Moses, because you have been strangers in the land of Egypt. And this was said in those remote and savage times when the principal ambition of the races and nations consisted in crushing and enslaving one another. As concerns religious toleration, the Jewish faith is not only far from the missionary spirit of converting people of other denominations, but on the contrary, the Talmud commands the rabbis to inform and explain to everyone who willingly comes to accept the Jewish religion all the difficulties involved in its acceptance, and to point out to the would-be proselyte that the righteous of all nations have a share of immorality. Of such a lofty and ideal religious toleration, not even the moralists of our present day can boast. The Jew is the emblem of eternity. He whom neither slaughter nor torture of thousands of years could destroy. He with neither fire nor sword nor inquisition was able to wipe off the face of the earth. He who was the first to produce the oracles of God, he who has been so for so long the guardian of prophecy and who transmitted it to the rest of the world. Such a nation cannot be destroyed. The Jew is an everlasting as its eternity itself. Once again, that is an excerpt from What is a Jew by Leo Nikolaevich Tolstoy, which gives us some idea of the concept of what the nations of the world actually thought of the Jewish people. Well, we have a few more minutes, and we do have a lot of more excerpts to bring out from here. A lot of research went into these papers. But here's another quote. This from an excerpt, of course, from the Ancient World, T.R. Glover from Ontario. No ancient people of the East has had a stranger history than the Jews. The history of no ancient people should be so valuable if we could only recover it and understand it. Strange still, the ancient religion of the Jews survives, when all the religions that of every ancient race of the pre-Christian world have disappeared. Again, it is strange that the living religions of the world all build on religious ideas derived from the Jews. This, then, is the problem offered by the Jews to the historian. The great matter is not what happened, but why did it happen? Why does this race continue? Why does Judaism live? How did it really begin? These questions will not be answered here. There lays the uniqueness of the Jews. Well, that's what I'm trying to ask, for people to mull it over a little bit and think about what's a special, unique position of the Jewish people in history. All right, one little excerpt here. This is from Cecil Roth, a very important book, and many people have read it, A History of the Jews, printed by Shokin Presses. Our survey of 3.5 millennia of Jewish history is closed, but the story which we have set ourselves is still unending. Today, the Jewish people has instilled those elements of strength and endurance which enabled it to surmount all the crises of its past, surviving thus the most powerful empires of antiquity. Throughout our history, there have been weaker elements who have shirked the sacrifices which Judaism entailed. They have been swallowed up long since in the great majority. Only the more stalwart have carried on the traditions of their ancestors, and can now look back with pride upon their superb heritage. Are we to be numbered with the weak majority or with the stalwart minority? It is for ourselves to decide. But from a reading of Jewish history, one factor emerges which may perhaps help us in our decision. The preservation of the Jew was certainly not casual. He has endured through the power of a certain ideal based upon the recognition of the influence of a higher power. Time after time in history, moreover, he has been saved from disaster in a manner which cannot be described excepting as providential. The author has deliberately attempted to write this book in a secular spirit. He does not think that his readers can fail to see it on every page a higher eminence. So here's even a Jewish person who's writing a secular book about the history of the Jewish people sees that there is something very, very unique and providential about the Jewish people. We have one fast minute to go. So therefore, I just want to conclude with the story from Rabbi Yaakov Emden, Siddur Beis Yaakov. Many have tried to injure us, but while they were not able to destroy us or wipe us out, all the great ancient civilizations have disappeared and have been forgotten. The nation of Israel who clings to Hashem, the Almighty, is alive today. What will the wise historian answer when he examines this phenomena without prejudice? Was this all purely by chance? By my soul, when I contemplated these great wonders of our continued existence, they took on greater significance than all the miracles and wonders that Hashem, blessed be He, performed for our fathers in Egypt, in the desert, and when they entered the land of Israel. The longer this exile extends, the miracle of Jewish existence becomes more obvious to make known the Almighty's mastery and His supervision over nature and history. So I have a few ideas about Jewish history, Jewish people, and how their unique position and maybe miraculous existence even survives today. Something to think over and to mull. And thank you very much for tuning in today.